Thank you, Lasker. Look, Minister, you're welcome to the House, and I want to welcome the Ambassador of Ukraine and the Ambassador of Lithuania. Ukraine war now, 2 years on, and we constantly see some images. But let's be honest about it, the Ukraine war has slipped down the media importance, if you want. We're seeing more from Gaza now than we are from Ukraine, and one wonders, you know, do we swing to the latest, greatest war, wherever it is? We've got to be realistic about this. There's over 500,000 people currently casualties in this war. This horrible war that nobody asked for, that Russia decided, for whatever reason, to push the button and go into Ukraine. The first thing I want to talk about today is Ireland and its position as a neutral state. And I constantly hear colleagues talking here about, because of our neutral position, we're in a strong position to negotiate or to make comment. Firstly, Minister Simon Coveney was the first one to come out and say, in the case of the Ukrainian war, Ireland is not neutral. That has been repeated by several ministers. Who, in God's name, gave them permission to come out with such a statement? The issue of Ireland's neutrality is something that, if you want to change it, you've got to bring it to the House of Parliament and discuss it. You can't just unilaterally decide we are no longer a neutral state. And when it comes to neutrality, the Hague Convention of 1907 states that we cannot, under any circumstances, support either belligerent in the case of a war. We have decided, again, unilaterally, our government has decided to provide non-lethal, non-military aid to Ukraine, but that goes against the Hague Convention. You cannot supply any sort of support. So why am I bringing this up today? I'm sure the Ambassador is wondering, am I backing away from my support for Ukraine? On the contrary, we have weapons in this country that are coming to the end of their lives, that instead of having to spend millions trying to dump them or to render them useless, why not give them to Ukraine? Why not give them to Ukraine and give them the power they need to fight an enemy that is ruthless? What is the great big deal about this? At the end of the day, we've said we're not neutral in the case of Ukraine. Do you think the likes of Vladimir Putin gives a continental damn whether it's a few bandages we provide or whether we provide weapons? At the end of the day, we have made our position clear. We are not neutral. It's a pity they didn't bring it to the House of Parliament before they decided it, but the decision has been made. So it's time that we rode in behind. I hate to say this in front of the Ukrainian ambassador, but right now there are promises being made from the West about weapons, about tanks, about money, about all sorts of things coming your way, and very, very few of them have been delivered on the ground. And we're wondering why the war is at a position of stalemate. It's at stalemate because the weapons you're being promised are not being delivered. It's at stalemate because you are not able to move forward. I agree with what Senator Ward said. You are up against a massive army. I agree with what Senator Chambers said. You're up against an army that really doesn't care how many of its people they throw under the bus and are quite prepared to slog it out for as long as it takes in order to try and win a war that should never have started in the first place, right? There are constant promises being made to you. Then we hear the talk of sanctions. There will be sanctions put in place and countries breaking the sanctions. Well, we need to look at some of the friendly Russian states and see how their international trade has increased quite substantially in recent years. Particularly over the period of the war. Why has it increased? It has increased because we can't export to Russia, but we can export to countries that are friendly to Russia and allow them to export into Russia. We need to have, if sanctions are in place, then every item that is sent or exported needs to be traced where it's being exported to and where it is being moved on from there. I was in Iran some years ago and there was sanctions against against Iran. You could buy a BMW 7 Series in the centre of Iran. You could buy any computer you wanted in the centre of Iran. Let's be honest about it. Sanctions? Commercial interests will always find a way around sanctions. So if we're going to engage in sanctions, let them be real sanctions. If we're going to engage in providing support, then let it be full support. If we've decided that what has happened in Ukraine is unjust, that Putin's attack on Ukraine was unjust, then for God's sake, let's get behind them, not with bandages. Let's give them everything we can to support them in their battle. We talk in this country about military, non-aligned and neutral, as if they were one and the same thing. They're actually polar opposites. You're either non-aligned or you're neutral. And those who stand up in this House and talk about Ireland's neutrality while we spend 0.2% of our GDP on the military, on the defence, should hang their heads in shame, for God's sake. When we should be spending somewhere close to 2%, when we should have a proper Air Force, when we should have a naval service that is capable of patrolling our sea. That's what being neutral is about. Military non-aligned, you can be military non-aligned and be like Iceland, have no army at all. Depend on somebody else to look after you. We tend to do that. There was an article yesterday, Minister, in the paper, and they were saying if there was a competition for hypocrisy in Europe, the book should close now because Leo Varadkar has won it by saying we don't have a problem in this country. We don't have anybody looking after our back door. We're able to look after ourselves. We're not. And that's a fact that we need to wake up to. So, if we're not going to use the weapons ourselves, give them to Ukraine. There have been several countries who have offered to take our weapons and get rid of them for us. And I know where they'd go. They'd go straight to Ukraine. And what about it? You know? Bandages, that's one thing. Support, real support, is about putting whatever resources we have behind the people in Ukraine. Senator Ward, in the closing part of his speech, I have to agree 100% with him. You cannot negotiate a peace with the likes of Russia. Because if you try to negotiate a peace, they will probably accede to some sort of a temporary border until 2 years down the line when they decide to increase it again. We saw what happened in Georgia. They just don't adhere to treaties that they make. So from that point of view, and I have to, in fairness to Senator Ward, he was one of the first people out to Ukraine to see for himself on the ground, himself and Senator Ahern, and to come back here and to relate what they've seen. And himself, and I see Senator Byrne here this afternoon, again, great supporters, Senator Harkin, Senator Martin, all great supporters of what Ireland should be doing for Ukraine. And we're shackled or hamstrung in this ridiculous, non-aligned, we're not NATO. We're not NATO. We never want to be NATO. They wouldn't have us. But if we're going to be supportive of Ukraine, and if somebody has decided that we are not neutral in the case of Ukraine, bring it into the Houses of Parliament, debate it, agree a process going forward, give them anything we can give them to help them fight the war. And that then brings us to the Ukrainians that are living in Ireland. And again, I gotta say, the senators that I've adverted to this afternoon have been true supporters of Ukrainian refugees in Ireland, and they're to be commended for that. But there is a disturbing undercurrent beginning to develop in Irish society at the moment, which is really rather worrying. Because one or two Ukrainians arrive in a particular village or town and they have, I don't know, a big jeep or something. Oh my God, how did they get here with a jeep? Very few people realise some of them had to run for their lives through countries like Moldova to get out, and they took everything they had, including their car. I'm not interested in the nonsense that's being pushed. Nobody from Ukraine is here because they want to be. They're here because they have to be. And the one thing I can say about the government is that you have been hugely supportive of it. And I hope that you continue to support the refugees that are coming in from Ukraine. They need our help. They need our support. And I know that my colleagues here will all echo that today. I think I think I've said enough for one day, and I'm going to leave it at that. Let's actually be honest about the whole support for Ukraine. Send the bandages if you want, but we have 84mm anti-tank weapons, which are now obsolete. But one round from an 84mm can take out a tank. And if we send 1,000 of those, there's the capacity to take out 1,000 Russian tanks. That's what we should be thinking about. Thank you, Minister.